My name is Rhiannon Quinn. I am 32 years old now, living a quiet, almost sterile life in Cleveland, Ohio. People often describe me as patient, perhaps even stoic. Meticulous, definitely. What they don't always see, not at first anyway, is the deep, lingering bitterness that coils inside me. It's not a fleeting anger, it's a core component of who I am, built over years, polished by memory and nurtured by a singular purpose. I am the architect of retribution, and my life was irrevocably derailed years ago by a selfish, disruptive housemate. This is the story of the chaos she wrought and the decades I spent ensuring she paid the price. Act 1. Set up the unraveling of the ordinary. My apartment in Cleveland is small, but I like it that way. Every object has its place, every surface is wiped down daily, sometimes twice. The quiet hum of the refrigerator is often the loudest sound. It's a stark contrast to the cacophony that defined a period of my life I can never truly escape, only compartmentalize. My friends, the few I allow close, tease me about my need for order. They don't understand it's not a preference, it's a defense mechanism. It's the only way I feel safe, like I have control after a time when everything was ripped from my grasp. Years ago, I was different. Younger, of course, barely out of college, filled with naive optimism and ambition. I had a clear path laid out: finish my degree, get a good job, maybe travel. I rented a room in a large, rambling old house near campus. It was a typical setup for the time, a mix of students and young professionals, all pooling resources to afford a decent place. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, a stepping stone into independence. I was excited about the shared experience, the late-night talks, the potluck dinners. I saw it as part of the adventure, learning to navigate different personalities, compromising, building a small community. The house had seen better days, but it had character. A wide front porch perfect for summer evenings, creaky wooden floors that told stories with every step, and a large kitchen that was supposed to be the heart of the home. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the quiet street. It wasn't huge, but it felt like mine. I unpacked carefully, arranging my books, setting up my small desk. I was ready to build my future, starting here in this slightly dusty, hopeful place. Then Debbie moved in. She arrived like a force of nature, or perhaps more accurately, a wrecking ball disguised as a person. Debbie wasn't her real name, of course, but it's the name I've used for her in the private, dark corners of my mind for years. She was ostensibly there to share the house expenses, just like the rest of us. But it quickly became clear Debbie had no concept of shared. The kitchen, once a place of communal cooking and conversation, became her personal domain, perpetually cluttered with dirty dishes and discarded takeout containers. The living room, meant for relaxing or studying, was often occupied by a rotating cast of strangers Debbie had brought home. She was loud, not just talking, but everything. Her music thumped through the walls late into the night. Her laughter was a piercing shriek. And her? Well, her chosen form of recreation with the aforementioned rotating cast of strangers was conducted at a volume that defied belief. The walls in that old house were thin, but Debbie seemed determined to test their limits. It wasn't just the noise. It was the complete and utter lack of consideration for anyone else living under the same roof. At first, we tried talking to her. Gentle hints, then more direct requests. Hey, Debbie, could you maybe turn the music down after 10? Would you mind cleaning up your dishes after dinner? Debbie, your guests are kind of loud. Each attempt was met with a shrug, an eye roll, or a promise that was immediately broken. She had a dismissive air, as if our requests for basic decency were unreasonable personal attacks. My patience, usually one of my strong suits, began to fray. It wasn't just the noise and the mess, though that was bad enough. Debbie's irresponsibility started impacting us financially. She was late with her share of the rent and utilities constantly. We covered for her at first, pooling our limited funds because we didn't want to get into trouble with the landlord. But it kept happening. The tension in the house became unbearable. The hopeful community I had envisioned dissolved into resentment and conflict. My carefully planned budget was constantly being raided to bail her out. The lack of sleep from the constant noise started affecting my studies. I was struggling to focus, my grades slipping. I was working part-time to cover expenses and save for graduate school, but I was constantly exhausted. My anxiety levels soared. The house, which was supposed to be my sanctuary, became a source of constant stress and dread. I'd come home from a long day, dreading what new chaos awaited me. Would there be strangers camped out in the living room? Would I be kept awake by the sounds from Debbie's room? Would there be another passive-aggressive note about unpaid bills she was responsible for? The cumulative effect was devastating. I missed deadlines for scholarships. My grades dropped enough that my application to a specific graduate program I had my heart set on was rejected. I couldn't keep up with my part-time job, and I ended up having to quit, losing valuable income and experience. The financial strain became immense. I had to dip into savings I had earmarked for crucial expenses, savings that had taken me years to build. My dreams, my plans for the future, felt like they were crumbling around me, and it all pointed back to the relentless, selfish disruption caused by one person. I remember one particularly bad night. I had a major exam the next morning, something I had been studying weeks for. I desperately needed a full night's sleep, but Debbie had a new guest over and the noise was beyond anything before. It wasn't just loud. It was like they were performing a theatrical production of indecency, complete with sound effects and bellows. I tried knocking on her door, begging them to stop. Nothing. I ended up sleeping on the floor in the living room, shivering, trying to block out the noise, my mind a jumble of stress and fury. I failed the exam. It wasn't just a bad grade. It jeopardized my ability to even graduate on time. That was the night something inside me broke. The naive, hopeful girl who had moved into that house died a little. In her place, something harder, something colder began to form. The bitterness took root. I realized that talking, compromising, hoping things would get better, none of it worked with someone like Debbie. She didn't care about anyone but herself. She was a parasite, feeding on the goodwill and resources of others, leaving destruction in her wake. We eventually managed to get Debbie to leave, a process that involved the landlord and considerable unpleasantness. But the damage was done. My life was significantly derailed. The path I had been on was gone. I had to take a different, less desirable job, couldn't afford the graduate program, and the financial hole she'd helped dig took years to climb out of. The emotional toll was even heavier. I became wary, less trusting. My once easygoing nature was replaced by a guardedness, a need for control that bordered on obsessive. For years, I just focused on surviving, rebuilding. But the bitterness remained, a constant ache. Every setback I faced, every opportunity I missed because of that derailed trajectory, fueled it. I would lie awake at night, replaying scenes, feeling the surge of anger, the sense of deep injustice. Why should I suffer while she just moved on to her next set of victims? I didn't actively plan revenge at first. It was more of a simmering fantasy, a way to cope with the unfairness. But as the years passed, and I meticulously clawed my way back to stability, the fantasy began to solidify. My inherent patience transformed into the ability to wait. My meticulous nature shifted from organizing my life to gathering information. The bitterness became the fuel. I started thinking, not just about getting even, but about making the scales balance in a way that truly reflected the damage she had done. I began to monitor her from a distance, discreetly, using the tools available in the modern world. Social media profiles, public records, news articles. I wanted to see where she landed, what she was doing. Part of me expected to see her repeating the cycle of chaos, maybe even struggling. But what I found only intensified my resolve. Debbie seemed to have landed on her feet. She had a respectable job, a seemingly happy relationship, a life that looked comfortable, stable. She was thriving, seemingly untouched by the wreckage she left behind in my life, and I suspected in the lives of others. This discovery was the inciting incident that moved me from passive bitterness to active retribution. Seeing her success, knowing the cost of it to me, ignited a cold, determined rage. The fantasy solidified into a plan. It wouldn't be a quick, emotional reaction like dousing someone with water. That was the kind of messy, impulsive action she would take. No, mine would be deliberate, precise, and devastating. I would become the architect of retribution. The foundation was laid, the blueprint was forming. It was time to build. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Act 2. Struggle, the desperation and descent into darkness. The decision to pursue retribution wasn't a sudden one, despite the trigger of seeing Debbie's seemingly perfect life online. It had been simmering for years, a slow cook of resentment and a deep-seated need for justice. Once the decision was made, though, my mind shifted into a different gear. My patience, which had helped me endure the years of rebuilding, now focused on the long game of revenge. My meticulous nature, once applied to keeping my small apartment spotless, turned towards gathering intelligence. The bitterness, a constant dull ache, became a sharp, focused energy. I started subtly. Online searches, public records databases, anything I could access without raising suspicion. I learned her real name. Found her current city, not Cleveland, but close enough for my purposes, just a few hours' drive away. I found her workplace, a mid-sized company in the tech sector. Found profiles of her friends, her family, her boyfriend. I built a detailed picture of her life, mapping out her connections, her habits, her apparent strengths and vulnerabilities. It was like assembling a complex puzzle, each piece of information adding to the grim masterpiece I was creating in my mind. This phase required immense patience. I couldn't rush. One wrong move, one careless digital footprint, and the whole plan could unravel before it even began. I spent months just watching, learning, analyzing. I created anonymous online profiles, joined groups she was in just to observe her interactions, her personality traits as they manifested now. Had she changed? Was she still the same selfish, inconsiderate person? All evidence suggested the core remained the same, perhaps hidden beneath a veneer of adult responsibility, but still there, lurking. This only solidified my resolve. My initial attempts were small, probing actions designed to test the waters and gather more specific information. Anonymous emails to her company's HR department asking vague questions about their employee conduct policies. Setting up Google alerts for her name and variations of it. Driving to her city just to see her neighborhood, her apartment building, the area around her workplace. It felt strange, almost surreal, this clandestine surveillance, but it was necessary. An architect doesn't just draw a building. They study the site, the materials, the environment. There were struggles even in this early phase. Moments of doubt would creep in, usually late at night when the apartment felt too quiet. Was this worth it? Was I sacrificing my present happiness for a past wrong? The bitterness would always answer. It wasn't just about the past, it was about the principle. It was about the fact that people like her shouldn't get away with destroying others' lives. The cost to me had been immense, and she hadn't paid anything. This wasn't just revenge, it was balancing the scales. One significant obstacle was finding a way to impact her life meaningfully without exposing myself. My meticulous planning focused on creating a chain reaction, a series of events that would appear circumstantial, perhaps even self-inflicted, but were, in fact, carefully orchestrated by me. I needed leverage, a point of vulnerability that, when exploited, would unravel the carefully constructed stability she had built. I discovered through my research that her job was very important to her. She had worked hard to get there, and it seemed to be a source of pride and financial security. This became the primary target. How could I undermine her professional life without directly confronting her or doing something easily traceable? It required subtlety. I found out about a major project she was leading at work, something high profile. This was it, the perfect opportunity. I spent weeks studying the project details, the company's structure, the key players involved. My meticulous nature went into overdrive. I needed to understand the system inside and out to find the weak points, the places where a carefully placed lever could cause maximum disruption. The struggle intensified as I moved from planning to execution. It involved creating fake personas online, setting up encrypted communication channels, navigating firewalls and security protocols. I felt like a spy in my own life, dividing my time between my regular job and the demanding, secret work of retribution. The stress was immense. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, the weight of the past and the complexity of the present pressing down on me. There were setbacks. A technical glitch almost exposed one of my online personas. A carefully crafted piece of misinformation didn't land as expected. Each failure, no matter how small, felt like a punch to the gut. It amplified the fear of discovery, the thought of all this effort being for nothing, or worse, backfiring on me. These moments pushed me closer to the edge, testing my patience, fueling my bitterness. My personal life became almost non-existent. I canceled plans with friends, claiming to be busy. I couldn't risk anyone noticing my preoccupation, my unusual activities. The isolation was a heavy price to pay. I was living two parallel lives, the quiet, orderly woman in Cleveland and the secret architect weaving a web of disruption hundreds of miles away. The psychological toll began to manifest. I had trouble sleeping. my mind racing through potential scenarios, risks, contingencies. I became even more withdrawn, my focus narrowed to the point of obsession. The bitterness, once a manageable internal ache, sometimes felt like it was consuming me whole. There were moments I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back, hardened, haunted eyes, a mouth set in a perpetual grim line. This wasn't just about getting back at Debbie anymore. It was about validating the years of pain, proving that my suffering meant something, that it warranted a response of equal measure. The rock bottom of this struggle came when a crucial part of my plan hit a major snag. It involved timing a specific action with a major corporate announcement. The announcement was suddenly delayed, throwing my meticulously planned timeline into disarray. Hours of work, weeks of careful setup, suddenly seemed wasted. I felt a wave of despair so profound it almost paralyzed me. It wasn't just the frustration of the plan failing. It was the sudden, crushing weight of the past, the reminder of how easily my life had been derailed by circumstances largely outside my control, circumstances initiated by Debbie. I remember sitting in my silent apartment that night, the darkness pressing in, and feeling utterly defeated. The bitterness curdled into despair. Was I destined to always be the one who suffered, the one whose plans were thwarted? Was she just going to continue sailing through life while I remained anchored to the past? The thought was unbearable. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed in years streamed down my face, hot and heavy with accumulated grief and rage. This was the lowest point. I was exhausted, isolated, and felt like I was failing even at the one thing that had given my suffering meaning, retribution. But then something shifted. The despair didn't consume me. It sharpened something within me. That deep-seated bitterness, the memory of the injustice, surged back not as a paralyzing weight but as a burning resolve. This setback wasn't a reason to stop. It was a reason to adapt, to fight harder, to be even more meticulous. My patience hadn't run out. It had been tested and proven resilient. I was the architect of retribution, and architects faced challenges. They found solutions. Rising from that low point, I felt a cold clarity wash over me. I would not be defeated. I would rework the plan, find a new angle, exploit a different vulnerability. The struggle had refined me, honed my skills, hardened my resolve. The woman who crawled out of that emotional pit was different from the one who went in. She was more dangerous, more determined, and utterly committed to seeing her design for retribution completed, no matter the cost. The final act was approaching, and Debbie had no idea the storm that had been brewing for years was about to break. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Act 3. Revenge, the reckoning, its execution, and the aftermath. Rising from that moment of despair wasn't a sudden burst of energy, but a quiet steeling of resolve. The meticulous part of my nature kicked in, overriding the emotional wreckage. Okay, plan A was disrupted. Analyze, adapt, find plan B, plan C, whatever it took. The bitterness was no longer just pain. It was fuel, a cold, clean energy that propelled me forward. I reviewed all the information I had gathered, looking for alternative angles, different vulnerabilities. My gaze settled on something else I had uncovered during my research: Debbie's relationship with her boyfriend, Mark. It seemed stable, serious. They lived together. They were talking about getting engaged. For someone like Debbie, who seemed to crave external validation and projected an image of success and happiness, a stable, loving relationship would be a cornerstone of her carefully constructed life. What if that cornerstone wasn't as solid as it appeared? I dug deeper into Mark. He seemed like a decent guy, perhaps a little naive. He had a good job in a different field. Crucially, I discovered he was close to his family, particularly his parents, and that they were somewhat traditional, valuing honesty and respectability above all else. The chaos Debbie had introduced into my life years ago wasn't just about noise or mess. It was about a fundamental disrespect for shared spaces, shared resources, and the well-being of others. It was about a selfish pursuit of pleasure and convenience at the expense of those around her. The loud sex wasn't the core issue. It was a symptom of her overall lack of consideration. And that lack of consideration often extended beyond the house, impacting her interactions, her honesty, her reliability. My new plan began to take shape, leveraging this insight. It would target not just her professional life, but her personal life, the foundation of security she seemed to value so highly. It would expose the core of who she was, the selfish, disruptive individual who had caused such widespread pain, not through my words, which she could easily dismiss, but through her own past actions and the impact they had. The plan was intricate, requiring absolute precision and patience. It involved using my anonymous online personas to connect with people from Debbie's past former housemates, colleagues from previous jobs, even acquaintances from college. My goal wasn't to rally them against her, but to subtly, meticulously, gather confirmation of her past behaviors. I found others who had suffered her particular brand of chaos. People she had owed money, people she had wronged professionally, people whose lives she had made difficult through her selfishness. The shared experience of having been debbed was surprisingly common. I didn't reveal my intentions to these people. I simply posed as someone doing research, perhaps writing an article about challenging housemate situations or difficult colleagues. I asked open-ended questions, listened patiently, and collected their stories. The consistency was remarkable. The same patterns of behavior emerged: financial irresponsibility, disrespect for boundaries, dishonesty, a complete lack of empathy or consideration for others. The loud, inconsiderate behavior, including the specific, unforgettable sounds of her nocturnal activities, was a recurring theme, a vivid symbol of her broader selfishness. Slowly, carefully, I began to compile this evidence. Not just anecdotes, but where possible, verifiable details, dates, places, specific incidents. I cross-referenced, verified, built a comprehensive, irrefutable case file on Debbie's history of disruption. This wasn't for a court of law. It was for a different kind of judgment. Simultaneously, I used my online research to understand Mark better. His values, his family's reputation, their expectations. I learned about his career aspirations, his financial situation, his hopes for the future. And I learned about his absolute unawareness of Debbie's past patterns. She had clearly presented herself to him as someone she wasn't: responsible, considerate, stable. The execution phase was a masterpiece of meticulous planning, if I do say so myself. It wasn't a single event, but a series of carefully timed actions designed to converge at a critical moment. I identified a significant upcoming event in Mark and Debbie's lives: a party, perhaps, or a family gathering where Mark's parents would be present and important announcements might be made. My plan involved presenting the compiled evidence of Debbie's past in a way that would reach Mark, and crucially his family, without it coming directly from me. It needed to look like an anonymous, perhaps well-intentioned, sharing of information. I couldn't risk contacting Mark directly. It would look suspicious. Instead, I used a multi-step process involving burner accounts, anonymous drop services, and carefully crafted digital breadcrumbs. I created a secure, anonymous online location containing the compiled stories and evidence, the documented history of Debbie's chaos, including specific examples of her financial issues, her treatment of others, and yes, even details about her famously loud and inconsiderate behavior, presented not pruriently, but as evidence of her fundamental disrespect for others' peace and privacy. Then, using my carefully constructed anonymous online personas, I began interacting subtly in online spaces where Mark or his close friends' family were active. Just enough to be a presence, to establish a plausible, albeit fake, identity. The final step was timing. Days before the critical event, I sent anonymous, untraceable messages containing links to the online repository of information. One went to an email address I had reason to believe Mark's parents checked. Another went to a close friend of Mark, someone who I knew was observant and perhaps a little protective of him. A third went to Mark himself, disguised as spam or a phishing attempt, but with a subject line carefully designed to pique his curiosity just enough that he might, against his better judgment, open it. The subject line was something vague but intriguing, like concerning information about someone close to you, or did you know the truth? It was agonizing, the waiting period after sending those links. My patience was tested to its absolute limit. Had they received the messages? Would they open the links? Would they dismiss it as spam? Had I been meticulous enough to avoid detection? The anxiety was a physical ache in my chest. I paced my apartment, every floorboard creak echoing the tension inside me. This was the culmination of years of planning, years of bitterness, years of rebuilding. Everything hinged on this. Then the reports started trickling in through my various anonymous monitoring channels. social media activity, subtle changes in online profiles, whispers in forums I had infiltrated. The links had been opened. The information had been accessed. I watched from a distance, unseen, unknown. I saw the fallout through the digital ether. Social media profiles that suddenly went private. Changes in relationship statuses. Posts being deleted. Friends of Debbie posting cryptic messages. And then, the more concrete signs, rumors circulating about Debbie at her workplace, subtle shifts in her online professional presence. Her perfectly curated life began to show cracks, then fissures. The ultimate impact hit precisely where it would inflict the most pain, mirroring the disruption she had caused me. The carefully documented history of her selfishness, her financial irresponsibility, her blatant disregard for others' well-being, all presented cold and hard, caused Mark and his traditional family to see the real Debbie. The picture they had of her, the one she had carefully constructed, shattered. The trust was broken. The engagement dissolved. The scandal, contained initially within their private circle, inevitably spilled over, reaching her workplace, her friends. Her reputation, the very foundation of her adult life, crumbled. My patient, meticulous plan had worked. The architect had completed her design. Justice, in my eyes, was served. Debbie was finally facing consequences proportional to the chaos she had unleashed on others, a consequence that directly targeted the stability and respectability she had built upon the ruins of lives like mine. In the aftermath, I didn't feel a surge of triumphant joy. There was a profound sense of quiet. The burning bitterness didn't vanish entirely, but the intensity lessened. The constant ache subsided, replaced by a dull throb. It wasn't victory, it was completion. The chapter was closed. There were no immediate consequences for me. My anonymity held. Debbie never knew and would never know that the unraveling of her life was not random chance, but the carefully orchestrated result of the pain she had caused years ago. The moral implications lingered, though. Had I gone too far? Had I become the very thing I despised? Someone who caused pain and chaos in another person's life? I wrestled with these questions in the quiet of my apartment. The answer was complex. I hadn't ruined her financial future completely, not like she had mine. I hadn't jeopardized her ability to graduate or get a job. I had simply, meticulously, revealed the truth of her character to those who mattered most to her, and allowed her past to finally catch up. It felt like a necessary rebalancing of the universe, a debt finally collected. My life didn't magically become perfect after. The years of derailment had left permanent scars, different trajectories I could never recover. But the constant weight was lifted. I could finally begin to move forward, not defined by the past, but having finally addressed the source of the lingering pain. The resolution for me is not one of perfect peace, but of a quiet, perhaps bittersweet, moving on. The architect has finished her work. The foundation of my new life, built on order and control, feels a little more solid now. The bitterness may leave a faint taste, but it no longer consumes me, and the surprising twist, it came years later, not in a dramatic reveal, but a quiet confirmation. I stumbled upon a forum discussing difficult past housemates. Someone was posting about their experience with a woman whose description matched Debbie perfectly. The same selfish behavior, the financial issues, the disruptive lifestyle, and yes, the infamous noise. The poster mentioned that this housemate's life had taken a sudden downturn around a specific time, losing her job and her long-term relationship, seemingly out of the blue. The timing aligned exactly with my plan's execution. And the final sentence of their post, describing the housemate's current state, was a grim echo of my own life years ago. She's living alone now, struggling financially, seems really bitter about how her life turned out. The chaos she spread had finally circled back, not entirely due to my actions, but perhaps amplified by them. She was now living with the consequences of her own nature, a state I understood all too well. The universe, it seemed, had its own slow, meticulous way of balancing the scales. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.